What's the hardest Mario game? I've spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours of my life yippee and yahooing my way through a bunch of Mario courses. So you would think that I'm the guy to answer that question, and well, I am. Yes, for this video, I have painstakingly analyzed every single game across the mainline Mario series and created a definitive list ranking each of them by difficulty. These games range from relaxing to...
It goes down.
No, it don't.
It do go down.
Oh!
So as you can imagine, a lot of thought went into this ranking. When you're going over 40 years of a series' history, the games are constantly evolving. Games are difficult for different reasons, so I made sure to consider several factors for each of them. The difficulty of some games ends with defeating Bowser. Others peak during their post-game. If a game has something like extra worlds or 100% completion, those will definitely play a role in how it's weighed. Think of it as a general amount of difficulty offered. I'll be sure to explain what I'm talking about as we go over each game though. I'd like to also add that my main focus will be on the amount of mechanical skill required. Something like collecting every blue coin in Super Mario Sunshine is more so tedious and time-consuming than challenging. The emphasis here will mainly be on the level design and the challenges themselves. Lastly, for games that have some type of assist mode for dying or are just inherently made easier with multiplayer, I did not factor that in at all. If you want to cheat, go ahead, but you won't hear me bragging about using rewinds when I play Super Mario Bros. 2. With all that out of the way, we have 20 games to go over, so let's go. For the easiest game, we have Bowser's Fury. Honestly, this was never even a contest. This game is incredibly short, with the main campaign lasting only a few hours. However, that's not even why it's the least difficult game. I mean, some of the older Mario titles can be beaten in like literal minutes. Bowser's Fury is just very forgiving, and that's by design. The entire game is one massive open world environment that prioritizes exploration over precision. There is still difficulty in a sense, especially with some of the platforming sections, but you're not really punished for failure either. There's no lives or game overs, and the respawn points are very generous, even saving your progress for things like cat shards. You also have basically infinite power-ups at your disposal, holding up to 25 power-ups at once that you can use in the middle of any level at any point is objectively broken. And on top of that, you're even given a Bowser Jr. companion that will just casually discover secrets or take down enemies for you. Unlike later entries on this list, this is not a rage-inducing game by any means. Even if you collect all 100 cat shines, none of them really stand out as super difficult. Again, that's because you're always accommodated to make sure that you're focused on exploring. While the Fury Bowser fight is pretty sick, there are a lot of ways to damage him, and you're even given Gigabells throughout the fight. The Plessy chase is probably the hardest part of this game, but it only lasts a minute and will give you as many retries as you need. That's in addition to still being able to access all your power-ups. In my opinion, Bowser's Fury is the exact type of game that it should have been. And I genuinely appreciated how it offered a very refreshing take on the Super Mario format, going all in on exploration. However, is it a difficult game? Absolutely not. Super Mario Land 2 is another game that certainly belongs on the tail end of this list. The structure here is surprisingly unique. Instead of traveling from world to world in a specific order, you need to collect 6 golden coins to unlock the door to Wario's castle. Well, formerly Mario's castle before a hostile takeover. These 6 coins each belong to their own world that you can complete in whichever order you'd like. Because of that, the difficulty doesn't scale like it does in other Mario games. All of these worlds are pretty easy. There's only a handful of levels in each of them, and just about every boss can be cheesed. On top of that, this game was not stingy with power-ups at all. You can expect to find a few in every level. In fact, whenever you reach a top exit, you're rewarded with yet another power-up, or up to 3 additional lives. And if we're talking about power-ups, we have to talk about the magic carrot. In my opinion, this is the most busted item in a Mario game, at least for how common it is. I played Super Mario Land 2 for the first time when it was added to the Switch's Game Boy library, and I learned very quickly that if you just spam the jump button, you can essentially hover over every level in this game. So yeah, this game's short, it's easy, and it also makes sure you constantly have broken power-ups equipped, and spare lives to boot. I guess Wario's castle itself offers some difficulty, but even this isn't particularly hard for a final level. Alright, now I get to talk about one of my childhood games, New Super Mario Bros. On the DS. And because I played this game as a kid, I can assure you it's one of the easiest Mario titles. As a concept, New Super Mario Bros. Is exactly what it sounds like. It was designed as a modern 2D platformer based on Mario's adventures on the NES, while also being accessible to a younger audience. Frankly, I think they crushed it. This is a really good interpretation. However, with its quality of life updates like checkpoints, additional saves, and the ability to store power-ups from Toad houses, it's one of the most approachable titles in the series. The 2D Mario games of today have kept a lot of these accessibility features, but they also offer further challenges through additional special worlds. This game, however, only featured the standard 8 worlds, so most of its replayability is found through its secrets, like hidden exits or star coins. The raw difficulty itself is noticeably scaled back, and even as a kid, this was very manageable to beat. It still has its moments though. I always thought it was super cool how 2 of the game's worlds could only be unlocked by clearing bosses with the mini mushroom. World 8 also does ramp up the difficulty a bit, and I still remember getting lost in the final Bowser Castle. Hiding your progress until you've made it to the very end of a level is just a sick premise. To this day, I still cherish these memories of playing New Super Mario Bros. On my DS Lite. It's an amazing game to grow up with, but it's definitely on the easier side. Sorry to all the Super Mario Land fans, but I would describe this game as Mario's crappiest adventure. That's not really its fault, it was one of the first Game Boy games, but it also only has 12 levels, and because of that, it's barely held back from being considered the absolute easiest game we'll talk about. You do have to clear every level since this game doesn't have warps, but the difficulty of Super Mario Land pretty much just stems from Game Boy jank. You can't retreat, you fully reset back to Small Mario when you get hit, and the controls are just clunky. The real challenge, however, is that the game doesn't have any saves. Honestly though, this is still a 30-minute adventure, and like, there is difficulty. I specifically remember hating these boulders. However, because this game was made for a tiny little Game Boy screen, I think the developers withheld a lot of potential. Even the bosses are not particularly hard, with half of them just dying when you jump on a button. The final Tatanga fight is cool, especially because you get your own airplane for an entire level, but he has an extremely redundant attack pattern, and you can defeat him within a handful of seconds. And now, for the third installment of the New Super Mario Bros. Series, we have New Super Mario Bros. 2.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I do not think this placement will be all that controversial. To be fair, of the New Super Mario Bros. Games, this is probably the one I am least familiar with. I genuinely didn't even remember so many of these levels, and I'm convinced that's because the gameplay feels so passive. It almost never really feels like there's any urgency. No thoughts, head empty, New Super Mario Bros. 2. It doesn't help that the entire game is centered around collecting a bunch of coins. It's pretty much impossible to have a single game over when you're being constantly force-fed additional lives. The only thing that puts this game higher than the original New Super Mario Bros. Is the final special world. World Star is significantly harder than the rest of this game. However, it still does pale in comparison to the special worlds of New Soup Wii or U. Ironically though, this game offers a ton of challenge through its DLC. Nintendo created a bunch of level compilations that you could purchase as packs, and some of them genuinely do compete with Mario Maker's level of cruelty. I'm not really considering these since they aren't part of the main game at all. Regardless, I do think it's funny that this game was a cakewalk 99% of the time, and then they decided to basically paywall its actual difficulty. I don't see how any of the 3D Mario games could be considered easier than Super Mario 3D Land. That's kind of crazy to think about, considering this game has 16 different worlds, including 8 special worlds. However, the core gameplay is just designed to be simple. When Nintendo remade Mario 64 for the DS, it suffered. If this was your childhood game, I'm sorry, but playing Super Mario 64 with a D-pad, despite the original being built around the analog stick, is just not great. To me, 3D Land has always felt like Nintendo learning from their mistakes. This game is not really ambitious at all. It's fun, but the controls and levels themselves seem to take into account both the 3DS's limited hardware and also presumably the younger audience of the system. 3D Land is still very fun, but I also remember breezing through it as a kid. A lot of the special worlds are basically remixes of other levels from the main campaign. While they are harder, the bar was pretty low in the first place, and you had also played through these levels already in the main campaign, giving you a sense of familiarity to it. The one level I remember actually struggling with was the Special 8 Crown level. Of course, the final level that you unlock for 100%ing the rest rest of the game. A lot of modern Mario games do this. 3D Lands was a fairly long challenge, but if you bring a couple of power-ups with you, it's not that hard to clear. I don't think this level alone bears so much weight in the grand scheme of things, which is why I'm confident in labeling Super Mario 3D Land as the easiest 3D game in the series. For this video, one of the most fascinating games to talk about is Super Mario Odyssey. For a 100% completion, it can easily take over 40 hours. But the reason I'm ranking it so low is that it kinda suffers from Bowser's Fury-itis. I still remember when this game came out, there were articles written about how it's not nearly hard enough. But honestly, I've never seen it that way. I think the people who made those claims either have a very one-dimensional view of what Mario should be, or they just don't understand Mario Odyssey. Odyssey, like Bowser's Fury, is about adventuring first, platforming second, and I'm completely okay with that. If you're gonna make a game about precise jumps, brutal level design, and punishing game overs, you do not make a game at the scale of this one. For instance, getting rid of the live system was never about dumbing down the gameplay. It was a necessary fix that allows you to stay engaged with worlds that are already overwhelming to begin with. If I'm constantly afraid of taking risks and losing my progress, that will inherently disincentivize me from exploring, which would be very annoying. But yeah, going back to difficulty, let's talk about the moons. I think something Odyssey executed perfectly was its sub-areas. The parts of this game that are genuinely punishing are kept separate from the main kingdoms, allowing you to respawn over and over again without distraction. Still, most of these challenges are quick bursts of frustration, if anything, comparable to something like Bowser's Fury's Islands. A lot of them just encourage you to experiment with the capture mechanic, and you're very unlikely to spend hours struggling with any of them, even when it reaches peak difficulty. There are also over 800 moons in this game. Most of them don't really require any display of skill to unlock. Like, so many of them can just be earned from ground pounding a shiny spot in the dirt, or literally just buying one from the shop. You do unlock Darker Side once you reach 500 moons. And maybe I just played too much Mario in my life, but it felt more like a highlight reel of captures than a real gauntlet. It's super fun, but because there's so many captures, it doesn't push any of them to its absolute limit. It's also hard to rank something like the jump rope or volleyball challenges since you have infinite attempts without dying. In the end though, Mario Odyssey is a masterpiece. The captures are sick, the movement is ridiculously fluid, and despite labeling it as easy, I had a blast playing this one the whole way through. Frankly, it's been leaving me craving more ever since. Super Mario Bros. Is a confusing game to rank. And before you say anything, no, I'm not going to talk about the minus world. For this game, you start off with a measly 3 extra lives, and that's not for one level or world, that's for the entire game. When you game over, it doesn't matter how far you made it, you're going right back to 1-1. With no saves or checkpoints, it feels genuinely like a Faudian experience at times. And you might even think it should be much higher up on this list. For people who didn't grow up playing this game, I think it can come across as more intimidating than it actually is. There are 8 worlds, each with 4 levels, and that sounds like a lot. However, how many people actually beat Super Mario Bros. That way? The game gets easier and easier the more you play it, not just because you're improving, but because of how many secrets you'll discover. The warp pipes specifically are absolutely broken. You still have to complete World 8, which is the most difficult world, but it's much easier when you can straight up ignore the vast majority of levels overall. If you already know where the secret exits are, collect a few hidden 1-ups, and protect the fire flower like your life depends on it, it's really not that bad. And while almost no one will beat it on their very first attempt, once you do finish it, you're done with the entire game. Even if you want to beat every single level, you can go back and select individual worlds from the main menu. If we're talking main campaign, this might technically be one of the hardest games to finish. But even then, most of the levels themselves are pretty short. So much of the difficulty is centered around the no saving aspect, and that feels a bit arbitrary. It's definitely frustrating to new players, but if we're considering total difficulty offered, I think this game is still fairly average in the grand scheme of things. Moving from the first 2D Mario over to the most recent, a lot of things have changed, but Super Mario Bros. Wonder is specifically unique in this case because it has its own ranking system for difficulty. Each level was given a tier between 1 to 5 stars. During my playthrough, I found just about every level with 3 stars or less to be pretty easy. For most of them, the Wonder Flower takes the spotlight. While this game has a ton of unique gimmicks, they don't usually push you very far, mechanically speaking. There are still challenging levels, especially with the later worlds. However, at this point in the the list, having difficulty that scales is not enough to make a game stand out. In fact, I would say for most of my experience with Wonder, it was one of the easiest Mario games I've ever played, possibly even as easy as New Super Mario Bros. But what makes this game above the very bottom is the Special World, where each level has 5 stars. It's not the hardest post-game, but it's definitely the most difficult thing we've talked about on this list so far. I replayed these levels for the sake of this video, and some of them absolutely stumped me. There's this one level where you're forced to play as a Goomba, and this final jump just kept kicking my butt. The game concludes with the final level, and then the final level. The final level is kinda hard, but I wouldn't say it's even as difficult as Odyssey's darker side. It's basically just a massive showcase of wonder effects, and I think the difficulty really just stems from the length of the level. I feel like they could have tested your familiarity with the wonder effects a bit more here. The final level is a badge gauntlet, and this is actually pretty difficult. I originally remembered this being possibly the hardest final level across the series. However, unlike other gauntlet type levels, this one does have checkpoints. If you buy a bunch of 1-ups from a Poplin shop, which are relatively cheap, you can easily get away with just gutting it out. Ultimately, I always thought it was kind of weird how this game seems to shelter you from difficulty for most of the main campaign. And then, with its Special World, it completely shoves you out of the nest. This was the placement that I decided makes the most sense. I talked about how games like Odyssey or Bowser's Fury aren't particularly challenging because they emphasize creativity and exploration. Super Mario Galaxy is also one of the easiest 3D titles, but instead it focused on immersion and story elements. Aside from a few secret stars, you don't ever really get lost in this game, hopping from planet to planet in a very intentional guided order. This assures that you're constantly engaged with the game's narrative, and you can even see this story first philosophy through the game's power-ups, using the bee mushroom to collect star chips off the Honey Queen's back, or infiltrating a ghost house as Boo. These are very unconventional ways to incorporate a power-up in the Mario series, to say the least. While certainly memorable, the main campaign probably won't trip up players if they're already familiar with Mario, aside from maybe a few boss fights. That being said, Galaxy doesn't completely shy away from intensity either. Some of the prankster comments in this game certainly leave their mark. However, pretty much every Galaxy veteran knows the real suffering through the game's trials. The Rolling Gizmo, Bubble Blast, and Loop-de-Swoop Galaxies all borrow some of their motion-based concepts from earlier in the game and turn them into absolute nightmares. Whether it's because of the motion controls or the level design themselves, these galaxies are guaranteed to leave you frustrated on your first playthrough. Super Mario Galaxy is fairly good at being challenging when it wants to be. However, one thing this game did that I will never understand is its very last level. To unlock it, you have to collect every star twice. Once as Mario and once as Luigi. After you accomplish that task and are finally entering the grand finale galaxy, you're greeted with the most generic level imaginable. Sure, it's cool going back to the Star Festival from the beginning of the game, but you're just collecting purple coins in a straight line. If this level's energy matched the amount of time it took to unlock it, I could see Galaxy moving up in the rankings. But with what we got, having this game in the middle of the list is very reasonable. Entering the top half of the rankings, we have Super Mario Bros. 3. The game was a complete revolution for Mario, adding a world map, tons of power-ups, and several new boss fights. It's also significantly longer than the original Super Mario Bros. As you get further and further into the game, some of these levels can get insane. There are entire worlds that just feel like gauntlets, and it's not even just mechanical skill. Some of the puzzles are more ridiculous than your average Kaizo level. I have to shout out the first fortress in World 7. This one has you find a P-switch hidden in a brick, enter a door, go through the first pipe, collect a Tanuki suit, and then enter yet another room. Finally, you'll need to randomly fly to the ceiling where you'll find another warp pipe that actually takes you to the boss. I wasn't even alive when this game came out, but what the hell were they putting in the water in the 1990s for kids to be able to solve this at all? This is not a level, this is straight up terrorism. This game is just clearly harder than the first Super Mario Bros. World 8 might even be the hardest final world in any Mario game, and the overall difficulty ranges from pretty tough to my cartridge doesn't work anymore. So now you might be wondering why this game barely cracks the top 10. Well, while the levels are hard, they're pretty short. Like, if they weren't difficult, most of them wouldn't even last 30 seconds. Sure, there are several new bosses, but almost all of them boil to jumping on an enemy's head 3 times. You can also easily abuse their hit stun animations for quick damage. This game also added a bunch of quality of life updates for the first time. Your progress will save after each world, you can collect power-ups from Toad houses and bring them into levels, and this was the first game to embrace the modern modern power-up hierarchy. When you have something like a fire flower, you still get to stay big after getting damaged, instead of resetting back to small Mario. This game also has warps like the first Super Mario Bros. You can even collect 2 whistles in World 1 to skip all the way to World 8. But to be fair, how many people will discover these on their own? Flying over a random section in the first fortress, or randomly crouching for multiple seconds on a white block are once again ploys to sell Nintendo Power magazines. Overall, I consider this middle of the list material, despite how hard some of its levels can get. However, if it had a post-game, it would probably be a bit higher. Speaking of post-game, that's honestly the main reason Super Mario World takes the edge over Super Mario Bros. 3. I would describe the levels in this game as easier but also longer, which kinda ends up balancing it out. But in addition, yeah, Super Mario World was the first game to include levels beyond the main experience. The special world here is honestly the weirdest one in the entire Mario series. Half of these levels are a piece of cake, and the other half are objectively the hardest levels in the game. I've always seen this as them trying to create a mix of levels that felt rewarding, but levels that also felt like challenges, since you were obviously good enough to make it all the way to the special world. These levels are far from friendly, and will even introduce new concepts in real time. Having to dodge a bunch of hammers while swimming in a trail of water, or avoiding enemies that are hiding behind trees. Yeah, these things can definitely catch you off guard. Tubular specifically, this level might as well be called tuberculosis. It made me hate the P-Balloon with a burning passion ever since I played it. Overall though, the difficulty feels pretty fair, especially compared to the games of the NES era. I always thought it was interesting how your progress was locked behind a secret exit in the Forest of Illusions, which returned as a concept in New Super Mario Bros. U. This game also had an incredible final boss fight with Bowser. The debut of the Koopa clown car is legendary, and I love how you have to toss the Mecha Koopas into him as he hovers around. For this one, I would say it still has a great balance of difficulty, which is why it's still one of my favorite classic Mario titles to go back to. Being the 4th game in the series, New Super Mario Bros. U had a lot of freedom to explore difficulty. It also offers arguably the most creative levels between the 4 games, with so much to work off of. As you might imagine, more often than not, this creativity heavily affects how challenging a level actually is. The way this game incorporates gimmicks like raft rides, roller coasters, and snake blocks, it's really neat seeing them take some of the most fun concepts from past games and ramp up the difficulty. One of my favorite mechanics from New Super Mario Bros. Wii was these floating water bubbles that you had to swim through in World 7-2. Seeing that gimmick return for this game's World 7 in a much harder level was extremely cool. At times, this game reaches peak New Super Mario Bros. The Special World specifically is an incredibly satisfying send-off to this series, with its challenge rivaling Super Mario World's hardest levels. Originally, I thought this might be a top 5 hardest game. However, there are some changes this game makes that I think make it more accessible than the other New Soup entries. The power-ups you can get in the world map are very broken. The balloon and bubble baby Yoshis can turn just about any level into a breeze, allowing you to take out pretty much anything with a pulse, or just hover over an entire level. In addition, the P acorn is not hard to find at all, yet it's comparable to something like the magic carrot from Super Mario Land 2, with its ability to jump and fly just as many times as you want. Lastly, the bosses in this game are pretty easy. Boom Boom is mildly annoying at best, and even the final Bowser fight is basically struggle-free if you're just patient. Some of you might want me to talk about New Super Luigi U or this game's challenge mode, which are where it does really reach its peak in terms of difficulty. New Super Luigi U is really just its own campaign. I mean, it was literally sold as a separate game at one point, and the challenges get incredibly tough, but they're just not part of the main campaign either. I feel like considering these would just open up a whole different can of worms, especially since I didn't talk about the DLC packs from New Super Mario Bros. 2. From a level design perspective, I think you could argue that this is the hardest game in the series. Personally, for me, it was a fun challenge. However, the fact that it has both the baby Yoshis and the P acorns makes me think they might have overcooked on the accessibility here. Now for my favorite, I mean the best Mario game of all time, Super Mario 3D World. This game is a spiritual successor to Super Mario 3D Land, but it's way more creative and way more replayable. A lot of people were disappointed when this game was announced because it wasn't the 3D Mario they wanted at the time, and yet it's just an amazing game despite its linearity. The levels here genuinely shine, and it keeps you constantly having fun with the amount of new ideas thrown at you. Even when a concept returns, it's done after you've already experienced dozens of new ideas in between, and they're typically altered to spice things up. Through these remixes, there is a good amount of challenge in the post-game. Levels like Blast Block Skyway, Faster Fort Fire Bros, and Gigantic Seasick Wreck, while difficult, are extremely fun to return to. The boss Blitz level from World Flower is also such a cool premise. I'm not saying every level is fair. Cosmic Cannon Cluster is a noticeable blemish on an otherwise perfect game, but regardless, the difficulty is pretty fun, usually. One of the things this game brought back was character-specific abilities, whether it's speed, height, a floaty jump, or I don't know, what does Mario have? Male pattern baldness? I don't know. Even if we're not accounting for multiplayer, which really is how this game is supposed to be played, but again, gotta stay consistent. The character's attributes obviously impact how easy the game is. Peach's float and Rosalina's spinning attack are kind of broken. In addition, the cat suit is just a really good item. It's one of the most elaborate power-ups ever put in a Mario game, which makes it extremely fun. It's a great power-up that rewards your familiarity with it, but having the ability to perform quick attacks and climb up walls is very convenient for traversing levels. That being said, this game is far from a cakewalk, especially in World Crown. Even with power-ups, Champion's Road can take hours to complete your first time around. Smuggling in power-ups functionally just allows you to take a few extra hits, and parts of this level don't even care what power-up you're using. The Piranha Creeper section forces you to perform very airtight jumps, the water section is ridiculous, and to top it off, you have to collect a bunch of keys while running on boost panels and dodging lasers. This ending is just a troll section at this point. Just as the nerves are setting in and you're trying to relax to clear the level, the game forces you to run Mach 10 in a ridiculous obstacle course. Champion's Road is my personal favorite of the big final levels for just how unabashedly devilish it is. It's a great level, but what's being slept on is this world's mystery house. Throughout the game, you encounter various purple mystery houses where you have to do an event within a strict time limit to get a green star. Out on the world map, there are different collections of these where you have to do 5 in a row, maybe 10 or 12. This one has 30 different objectives, each with only 10 seconds on the clock. You have to complete all of these in a row without failure or you'll be reset to the very start. Not all of them are that bad, but there are some that are challenging and can make or break your run, and the stress just masterfully builds up as you make it further and further into the level. Just like New Super Mario Bros. U, I would say this game has a lot of difficulty within it. At its peak though, 3D World is the harder game. Some people think that Super Mario Bros. 2 is easy. However, among the games in the original Mario trilogy, I think it's the hardest one. At a glance, I guess there is an argument to be made otherwise. You get access to the same characters and abilities from Super Mario 3D World, which definitely helps. On top of that, there are only 20 levels in the entire game. However, those 20 levels are way longer than any other level from this era, with each one having several different screens. Sure, there are checkpoints, but this game would be ridiculously cruel without them. You still have most of the standard Mario platforming features, but the levels also double as puzzles. Getting lost is inevitable, especially as you progress. Mario 2's ability to pluck items out of the ground or pick up and throw enemies is a pretty unique mechanic to this game. However, you're basically required to master it. Every level has a boss fight at the very end, and these fights are much tougher than something like Boom Boom or the Koopalings. More often than not, the very item you're throwing to deal damage is actively being used against you, and you are all but guaranteed to slip up. These bosses are also remixed throughout the game, so the fact that a Birdo can just suddenly start shooting fireballs at you is just evil. But yeah, the bosses are no joke. To exit a level, you have to walk into this giant bird thing's mouth, and in the final level of the game, there is a decoy exit that will suddenly attack you, and then you have to fight the final boss, which takes 6 hits to defeat. One advantage this game does have over the first Super Mario Bros. Is that you can restart from the world you died in if you game over. However, you are only given 2 continues until you have to reset all the way back, which frankly I've never understood. At the end of the day, people sleep on this game, but I stand by this placement. The checkpoints and extra lives you get from playing slots at the end of each level is really the only thing keeping this game out of the top 5. At number 5, we have Super Mario 64, and I would describe Super Mario 64's difficulty as just inaccessible. To people who didn't grow up with it, the camera can be a massive nuisance, and the controls themselves feel clunky. The movement isn't bad, it's just very precise, and it definitely takes some time to get used to, especially if you're coming from older Mario games. However, to mitigate how challenging it can feel at the start, this game allows you to move at your own pace. As long as you earn the required amount of stars, it doesn't really care where they came from. So if you're struggling with one section, section you can return later once you become more familiar with the movement. For a normal 70-star run, I don't think this game is that bad. However, there are several stars that are in fact that bad. Tick-Tock Clock and Rainbow Ride are probably considered the hardest levels, and while Tick-Tock Clock allows you to slow down time when you enter the level, Rainbow Ride earns its legacy for sure. It's basically 3D Mario's first take on an auto-scroller, except the thing you scroll on is this tiny little carpet. I don't know about you, I don't love auto-scrollers. Almost every star from this area can be frustrating. I feel like everyone I talk to about Mario 64 disagrees on which stars are hard. For instance, I personally have always found the caged star with the owl to feel very inconsistent and finicky, whereas other people might find it to be one of the easiest stars in the game. However, I have yet to meet a single person that doesn't hate Wing Mario over the rainbows. This star has you collect 8 red coins randomly placed throughout cloudy islands. It's based around cannons and the wing cap, which are both notoriously hard to control. Having to find and collect 8 red coins without falling is very nerve-wracking, and if you do fall, the game trolls you by dumping you on the moat outside Peach's castle. Other honorable mentions include some of the red coin stars from the Bowser levels, and a good chunk of the 100 coin stars. Collecting 100 coins sounds easy on paper, but in some of the most difficult levels where it's easy to fall, it's very stressful, especially in levels where there's barely over 100 coins to begin with. In a weird way, I would say Super Mario 64 is generally simple, but definitely not easy. I feel like so many of its stars would feel standard in any other 3D Mario game. However, the tightness and precision this game requires, mixed with some of its larger punishments for failure, definitely carry this game into the top 5. For a 100% playthrough, it will genuinely leave you feeling like you have absolutely mastered its controls, which is I think why this game still has such a big fan base and not something I think I've really experienced with any other Mario game. The final New Super Mario Bros. Game on this list is New Super Mario Bros. Wii. I originally struggled whether deciding this game or U should be higher, but pacing wise, I think this one has a longer stretch of difficulty earlier on. When you get into the later worlds, I think the level design is comparable to even a game like Super Mario Bros. 3, except they're longer and more complex. Obstacles like fire bars, skewers, or lava are not used sparingly. Additionally, the final Bowser fight is, in my opinion, the hardest boss battle in any 2D Mario game. It starts off as a standard Super Mario Bros. Bowser fight and ends with a chaotic auto-scroller as you're chased by a giant version of him. If you're going for 100% completion, I would say that World 9 is on par with the special world from New Super Mario Bros. U. Plus, the star coins in these levels are even more brutal since they're placed in some of the most inconvenient areas possible. Level 9-7 might genuinely be my least favorite 2D Mario level ever. This one has a bunch of enemies shooting fireballs at you, and the entire level is made up of ice with munchers hiding inside ready to thaw out and kill you. This level would have been difficult without the ice, but trying to navigate through it with no traction is near impossible. The placement of the star coins in this level is just straight up heinous, and I really don't think New Super Mario Bros. U has anything that's comparable to this, and if anyone says this game was easy, I would genuinely encourage you to replay it, because it will likely catch you off guard. While Super Mario Galaxy has its moments, Super Mario Galaxy 2 pushes the difficulty to its absolute limit. Originally planned as DLC for the first game, it kind of already expects you to have an understanding of the core mechanics. Because of that, this game heavily experiments through its level design, both with really creative levels and also some pretty hard levels. If you're just beating this game normally, you might think placing Galaxy 2 this highly is absurd. There are enough approachable levels in this game to where most people won't have a problem collecting the 70 stars needed to take on Bowser. And even the final Bowser fight itself is admittedly one of the easiest in the entire series. But for those of us who have really played Galaxy 2, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When this game wants to be difficult, you will definitely know, because it does not hold back. This is the type of game to introduce you to a boss, and then when he returns, he's on fire, and there's meteors falling from the sky, and there's lava everywhere. Daredevil comments will make you clear an entire level, boss fight included, all with 1 HP. Some of the challenges in this game have the most precise and strict time requirements I've ever seen in the Mario series. But the real thing that bumps this game up to the third hardest on this list is the Special World. World S is easily the single hardest world in any Mario game. The levels here range from brutal obstacle courses, to rolling ball coasters from hell, to a galaxy that forces you to take on 5 bosses in a row. And on top of that, each of these levels are remixed with things like purple coins, time constraints, or a parade of cosmic Marios. This section is tougher than tough. I probably have over 100 hours across both Galaxy games, and even I struggled to clear these levels on my first couple of attempts when I replayed Galaxy 2 for the Switch. We also have to talk about Grandmaster Galaxy, as there's debate whether or not this is the hardest level in a Mario game, with Champions Road being maybe just a little more difficult, but when you clear it, you have to beat it all over again without getting hit once, which gets very stressful very quickly. Ultimately, Galaxy 2 is pretty much the exact type of game you want it to be. At times it can be a breeze, but as a sequel created to take the mechanics of Galaxy 1 further, if you're looking for a challenge in this game, there is no shortage of difficulty. What I think is the most challenging 3D game in the Super Mario series is kind of a sleeper agent. Despite the game's namesake, Super Mario Sunshine is more often than not pretty damn far from Sunshine. To beat this game, you need to collect the first 7 shines from each level. So if you are stuck on an episode, you kind of just have to white knuckle through it, no matter how frustrating or confusing it is. On top of that, the final level of this game is almost universally hated. The Bowser fight itself is not that difficult, but the Corona Mountain boat ride is just brutal. Once you've beaten the main game, well, congratulations, you've completed the easiest part about Super Mario Sunshine. While there is no special world like Galaxy 2, the post-game has enough difficulty to account for like 3 of them. So many of this game's shines feel like pure rage bait. The pachinko level, the chuckster level, the lily pad ride, the roller coaster balloons, the frickin' watermelon. I'm convinced that when this game was being made, the developers were divided into 2 groups. People who wanted to make a Mario game and sadists. Even for some of the more tame levels where you just complete tasks like cleaning a beach or winning a race, if you don't finish within the allotted time, this game will punish your failure with death. While I think you could argue that the hover nozzle mitigates a lot of the difficulty, functioning as sort of a platforming crutch, even then, this game has no problem ripping that platforming crutch right out of your hands in some of the cruelest levels this game has to offer nonetheless. I already said that I'm not even factoring in collectibles, but if we did, Super Mario Sunshine would easily be the most frustrating game to 100%. There are 240 blue coins, some of them being placed in the most inconvenient locations possible. Others laugh at you from a distance as you spend hours searching for them. In a game like Super Mario Odyssey, if you're missing a moon, you can go talk to a parrot that will guide you. In Super Mario Sunshine, you can go yourself. Hell, you can even get lost using a guide because certain blue coins will only spawn for you in select specific episodes, despite there being no indication of this throughout the game. This is a game about Mario getting thrown into prison, but if anyone should be put in jail, it's the developers for their crimes against humanity. Nah, obviously I kid. I actually do like Super Mario Sunshine. It's a very fun and important entry in the Mario series. However, intentional or not, you cannot deny this game has a relentless amount of just frustration. By Mario standards, this game can be just about as hard as it gets. And now, for the #1 hardest Mario game of all time. I would love to be able to pretend like I was about to blow all of your minds away with some crazy hot take that I will relentlessly defend to the death, but sometimes the right answer is the obvious one. For the hardest Mario game, it was never really up for debate. Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels has been a menace to society since day one. Every single thing that made the original Super Mario Bros. Approachable, the reason this game saved the gaming industry, this game completely defenestrates it. In Mario 1, the first level is designed to encourage you to jump on Goombas and collect mushrooms. In Lost Levels, the first mushroom you will encounter kills you. Warp pipes will send you back to previous worlds. So many of the areas in this game are only reachable after blindly jumping into invisible blocks. It's insane that this game was designed for people who mastered the mechanics of Super Mario Bros. However, it punishes your familiarity with the mechanics by constantly trolling you. The castle levels are just insane. 8-4 specifically will cause you to experience psychosis. I didn't include Mario Maker in this list because those games have millions of levels that I obviously can't talk about. However, this is the Mario Maker. Every awful, horrible, painful troll level you could possibly experience, Shigeru Miyamoto maniacally programmed into this game back in 1986. Even when you clear the main adventure, you then unlock World 9. And who could have guessed, World 9 is pure hell. You can expect horrors far beyond humanity's comprehension. Like a random Bowser sprite just chilling in the middle of a level blocking your path as he throws hammers at you. Of all the games that needed a post-game, this was not it. And World 9 is not even where this game ends. We haven't talked about Worlds A, B, C, and D. Oh, but how do you unlock them, you ask? All you have to do is beat the game and then do it 7 more times. Sometimes I'm convinced Nintendo designed this game as the Mario to end all Marios. They figured no one would possibly play this game and want anything else to do with this wretched plumber. I would say the final 4 worlds are the exact type of masochistic experience you would assume they are. However, However, if you have the determination to make it here, you no longer have any ounce of frustration left to give. You have reached Super Mario Nirvana. Hell, you're not even playing a Mario game anymore. All you see is the raw pixels and waves displayed on your screen. You're just deciphering the very assembly code that was used to program the game. Every variable, every bit, every integer, it's all there. The only possible redeeming quality this game has is that it did add checkpoints at the end of each world. But if anything, that is not an advantage. That is an illusion, a psychological trick employed by Nintendo to keep sucking you back into this world of eternal torture. Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels is a game so demonically evil and cruel that I won't even say its name a third time to avoid summoning it. This is, by far, the hardest Mario game of all time. But yes, while the #1 game doesn't really require much of a defense at all, at the end of the day, difficulty is subjective. I'm sure you all disagree with at least some or maybe all of the placements on this list. To be honest, we do these videos a lot, and sometimes I can kind of predict where the comments will have a disagreement, but for this one, I really don't know. So I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. We'll be in there, because with a series as complex and malleable as Super Mario, just making a list like this is pretty damn hard by itself. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to see the rarest power-up in all of Mario, we got a video for you. It's on the screen right now. Stay safe out there, guys. We'll see you in the next one.